There comes a point in every great story when time itself feels like it's whispering back to you. The roar of the crowd fades, the flashing lights dim, and what's left is memory, pure, quiet, and honest. For Paul McCartney, that moment came late in life. At 83, after decades of headlines, awards, and sold-out arenas, he has finally spoken about the one friendship that both defined him and haunted him, the bond he shared with George Harrison. And the truth, as McCartney now reveals, is not about fame or rivalry. It's about love, forgiveness, and the small, unspoken things that live between two souls who once changed the world together. But to understand that truth, we must return to where it all began. A boy with a guitar and a dream in the streets of Liverpool. Liverpool, 1942. A city still shaking off the dust of war. Bombed buildings, hungry families, and dreams that seemed too fragile to last. Among the rubble and ration books lived a boy named James Paul McCartney. His father, Jim, worked long hours and played jazz piano in his free time, filling their home with rhythm and warmth. His mother, Mary, was a nurse, gentle, steady, and the heart of their small world. Music wasn't just a pastime in the McCartney household, it was language. Evenings were spent around the radio, voices harmonizing without trying. Paul would later say that he learned melody from his father, but compassion from his mother. Then, one day, the music stopped. When Paul was just 14, his mother died of breast cancer. The silence that followed was unbearable, a silence he would try to fill with sound for the rest of his life. Years later, when he wrote Let It Be, he said it came to him in a dream. His mother appeared, her face calm, her voice soft. Let it be. It wasn't just a lyric, it was a message that carried him through everything that followed. That was the beginning of Paul's emotional vocabulary, the ability to turn heartbreak into harmony. And it was that same heart that would soon meet another restless dreamer who would change everything. It was July 1957, at a church fete in Woolton. The air smelled of grass and cigarettes. Boys tuned cheap guitars behind the stage. Girls whispered about them from the crowd. On the small outdoor stage stood a teenage John Lennon, rough, witty, fearless, leading his skiffle group, the Quarrymen. Paul, just 15, watched in fascination. When Lennon stepped down from the stage, someone introduced them. Paul picked up a guitar, flipped it over, left-handed, and began to play. He showed John how to properly tune it and played 20 Flight Rock without missing a beat. Lennon was stunned. That afternoon, two worlds collided. One boy was instinct and rebellion, the other, melody and precision. Together, they found balance. Within weeks, John asked Paul to join the band. That handshake, casual, almost careless, would change the sound of the century. It wasn't long before Paul brought in a friend, a quiet kid named George Harrison. George was only 14, small for his age, shy but sharp-eyed. He didn't talk much, but when he played guitar, the room fell silent. Even Lennon, who rarely praised anyone, raised his eyebrows. George's playing was clean, almost spiritual. He could make a guitar speak, cry, even laugh. Paul saw something in him, not just talent, but purity. He was like a little brother to me, Paul later said. I felt protective of him. The three of them, John, Paul, and George, would become the creative triangle that powered the Beatles. Different in style, united in hunger. They weren't chasing fame then, only music. Before stadiums and screaming fans, there were endless nights in Hamburg. Cramped rooms above clubs, little food, less sleep. They played 6, sometimes 7 hours a night. Their hands blistered, their voices cracked. But in that exhaustion, they became one, a brotherhood forged in smoke and sweat. Paul remembered George's grin in those days. He'd joke about the food, the cold, the broken amplifiers. Even when the others argued, George would quietly start strumming something beautiful, and suddenly, everyone calmed down. That was his gift. He didn't fight for control, he brought peace through sound. By the early 1960s, everything changed. The Beatles exploded into the world's consciousness, 4 boys from Liverpool who made the impossible look effortless. Their charm was disarming, their chemistry unstoppable. And at the heart of it all was the interplay between Paul's melodic grace, John's rebellious wit, and George's soulful touch. Yesterday, Hey Jude, Let It Be, Blackbird. McCartney's songs poured from him like confessions. But behind the harmonies, tension was brewing. The very brilliance that bound them was also beginning to pull them apart. George, often overshadowed by Lennon and McCartney, began to feel the weight of invisibility. He had ideas, sounds, and spiritual depth the others didn't always understand. But the band machine was relentless. Paul admits now, I probably didn't give him enough room. I was obsessed with getting every note right. I should have listened more. It would take decades and distance for him to truly grasp what George had been trying to say. By 1970, the magic had become a battlefield. Creative disagreements, exhaustion, and ego fractured the bond that had once seemed unbreakable. The Beatles disbanded, and the world mourned. For Paul, it wasn't victory. It was heartbreak. He retreated to the countryside with Linda Eastman, his wife and anchor, who reminded him that music could still heal. Their farm became a refuge, muddy boots, laughter, and songs recorded at the kitchen table. With Wings, Paul rebuilt himself from the ashes. Hits like Band on the Run and Live and Let Die reminded the world that McCartney's genius hadn't faded, it had matured. Still, no matter how high he soared, a part of him always looked back. The sound of George's guitar lingered in his memory like a voice calling from another room. Paul's personal life mirrored his music, beautiful, painful, and evolving. Linda Eastman was his soulmate, a woman who didn't just love him but understood him. Together, they raised a family, built a life of simplicity, and co-founded Wings. When she died in 1998, Paul's world went gray. I lost the person who kept me human, he said quietly years later. Then came Heather Mills, a brief, turbulent chapter filled with media noise and heartbreak. Their marriage ended bitterly, but Paul refused to let resentment harden him. And in time, peace returned in the form of Nancy Shevell. Calm, elegant, private, she didn't seek the spotlight. She offered stillness. For the first time in years, McCartney looked content, not chasing the past, but living gently in the present. Most men would have retired long ago. Paul didn't. He toured relentlessly into his 70s and 80s, playing to stadiums packed with fans from 3 generations. His concerts became pilgrimages, 3-hour journeys through time, from Love Me Do to Hey Jude. Between tours, he kept creating. His classical work, Ecce Cor Meum, written in memory of Linda, stunned critics with its sincerity. He dabbled in electronica, collaborated with younger artists, and never stopped experimenting. Every project carried one common thread: heart. But behind that constant motion, something more private stirred, a growing reflection on the past, and on the friends he'd lost along the way, especially George. When Paul speaks about George now, his tone softens, his eyes mist. George was like my kid brother, he says. I always wanted to look out for him. But the truth is, he didn't need looking after. He was wiser than any of us realized. George had always been different. While the others sought fame, he sought meaning. He studied Indian philosophy, played the sitar, and found peace in meditation. To some, it seemed eccentric. To Paul, it now feels prophetic. George taught me patience, he admits. He taught me to slow down, to breathe. I didn't get it then, but I do now. During the height of the Beatles, their relationship often simmered with quiet tension. George wanted space. Paul wanted perfection. They clashed in the studio, argued over arrangements, and sometimes went days without speaking. Yet beneath it all, there was deep affection. They were brothers in every way that mattered, even when they couldn't say it out loud. When George fell ill in the late 1990s, Paul visited him privately. No photographers, no entourage, just 2 old friends. George was frail but peaceful, his room filled with flowers and the faint scent of incense. They sat together for hours. Paul recalls, we didn't talk about fame or records or any of that. We talked about gardens, about family, about love. There were no tears, only quiet acceptance. They held hands, and for a moment, time stopped. When I left that day, Paul says, I knew it would be the last time I saw him, But I also knew we were good. Nothing left unsaid. That moment stayed with him, the calm in George's eyes, the gratitude between them. For all the chaos that once surrounded them, their final meeting was pure peace. Since George's passing, Paul has carried his memory into every performance. In the middle of his concerts, the lights dim. He picks up a ukulele, George's favorite instrument, and begins something. At first he plays alone, the soft rhythm of his fingers echoing in the dark. Then, as the band joins in, the crowd feels it, George's presence. Paul looks upward and smiles. "It's like he's up there laughing at me," he once said, saying, "You finally got it right, mate." That connection is more than nostalgia, it's communion. Every chord is a conversation between two friends who never really said goodbye. At 83, McCartney no longer sees success in numbers or fame. His legacy isn't the records sold, but the lives touched. And at the center of it all is love, the kind that outlives everything else. He often reflects on George's lessons. That simplicity can be sacred. That patience is power. That music at its best is prayer. "George taught me how to see the beauty in small things," Paul says. "A flower, a laugh, a sunset. I used to rush through life. He made me stop and look." Now, when he performs, there's a serenity to him. A man who has found peace not through perfection, but through forgiveness. Not just of others, but of himself. And so, after all the years, after the noise and fame, what remains is something simple. A boy from Liverpool who learned to turn pain into melody. A friendship that survived pride, distance, and time. And a truth spoken not in headlines but in whispers. Paul McCartney's story is no longer just about the Beatles, it's about humanity. It's about learning that even the brightest lights cast shadows, and even broken bonds can find healing. He says, "I miss George every day, but when I play his songs, when I hear his laugh in my head, he's still here. He's in the music, he's in the air." In telling this truth, McCartney closes the circle that began in Liverpool's smoky clubs and ended in quiet forgiveness. For him, George Harrison was never just the quiet Beatle. He was a brother, a mirror, a teacher, the soul that reminded him what truly matters. And as Paul's twilight years unfold, his words echo softly. "Love is the one thing that doesn't fade. That's what George showed me. That's the truth." The Beatles changed the sound of the world, but beneath the music lived something even greater. A brotherhood that survived the storms of fame. And though time has carried them into legend, the essence remains. Every note Paul plays, every chord that rings through the crowd, carries George's spirit. In the end, their legacy isn't just melody, it's emotion. It's love, forgiveness, and the courage to be human. Because when all the applause fades, what stays are the friendships that shaped the song. And for Paul McCartney, even now at 83, that song still plays on. Tender, eternal, and true. Let it be.